The waitress welcomed a deaf, lonely elderly woman into her home on Christmas Eve, but was left speechless when the old lady revealed she wanted her as a daughter-in-law. The snowflakes fell like whispered secrets over Chicago, coating the empty streets in white as the clock on Rosie's diner ticked toward 9:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Inside, Stephanie Chen wiped down the same counter she'd been polishing for 19 months now, her reflection ghosting across the worn formica surface, a 26-year-old woman with tired eyes and calloused hands that told stories her mouth never would. The diner was empty. Had been empty since 7:30 when the last customer, a traveling salesman named Murray who always ordered black coffee and left exactly $2.25 in tips, had shuffled out into the snow mumbling something about getting home to a wife who'd probably already gone to bed. "You can go, Steph." Rosie herself stood in the kitchen doorway untying her grease-stained apron. 73 years old with silver hair pinned in a bun that hadn't changed style since 1987, she'd owned this diner for 41 years. "Nobody's coming in this weather. Not on Christmas Eve." Stephanie shook her head, her dark ponytail swaying. "I'll close up. You should be with your grandkids." "And you? Where are you going tonight?" The question hung in the air like the smell of burnt coffee. Stephanie forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Home. Got a frozen lasagna with my name on it, and a Law and Order marathon." What she didn't say, home was a 380-square-foot studio apartment on the third floor of a building where the elevator had been broken for 11 months. Home was $127 in rent, due in 6 days, and $847. $33 in her checking account after she'd sent $400 to her younger brother's commissary fund at the county jail. Again, home was a silence so thick, she sometimes left the TV on all night just to remember what human voices sounded like. Rosie studied her for a long moment, the way she always did, like she could see straight through the carefully constructed walls Stephanie had built. But she didn't push. She never did. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." "Merry Christmas, Rosie." The bell above the door chimed as Rosie left, and then Stephanie was alone. She finished wiping the counter, checking her phone out of habit. No messages, no missed calls, no evidence that anyone in the world was thinking about her tonight, and began her closing routine. To understand who Stephanie Chen really was, you had to go back 8 years, to a cramped apartment in the Pilsen neighborhood, where an 18-year-old girl had come home from her shift at the grocery store to find her mother unconscious on the kitchen floor. The stroke had come without warning, as strokes often do, and in the 47 minutes it took for the ambulance to arrive and transport Linda Chen to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Stephanie's entire future had collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Her mother survived. But the Linda Chen who woke up 3 days later wasn't the same woman who had raised 2 children alone after her husband's death, working double shifts at the dry cleaner while learning English from soap operas and picture books she borrowed from the library. This Linda Chen couldn't speak clearly, couldn't walk without assistance, couldn't remember her daughter's name on the bad days, which came more often than the good ones. Stephanie had been 2 semesters away from finishing her nursing degree at the University of Illinois. She'd been engaged to a boy named Kevin, who worked at his father's insurance agency and drove a Honda Civic that he washed every Sunday morning. She'd had plans, dreams, a future mapped out in careful detail. All of it vanished in 47 minutes. She'd dropped out of school to care for her mother full-time. Kevin had tried to understand at first, but understanding only stretches so far when your fiancé cancels dinner plans for the 6th week in a row because her mother had another episode. He'd left 18 months later, kept the ring, said he'd think about returning it, never did. She hadn't seen him since, though she'd heard through a mutual friend that he'd married a paralegal named Brittany and bought a house in Naperville. Her mother had died 4 years ago. 61 years old, gone quietly in her sleep, leaving Stephanie with $23,000 in unpaid medical bills, a shoebox full of faded photographs, and a jade pendant she never took off. The only piece of jewelry her mother had brought from Guangzhou when she'd immigrated at 22. Stephanie touched the pendant now, a reflex she barely noticed anymore, and reached for the mop. That's when the door opened. The bell chimed, sharp and unexpected, and Stephanie looked up to see a small figure struggling against the wind. An elderly woman, 80 if she was a day, wearing a wool coat that had seen better decades and clutching a patent leather purse against her chest like a shield. Snow clung to her gray hair, her thin frame trembling from the cold as she finally managed to push the door shut behind her. "I'm sorry," Stephanie started. "We're actually The woman didn't respond, didn't even look at her. She shuffled toward the nearest booth, her orthopedic shoes squeaking against the wet floor, and lowered herself onto the vinyl seat with visible effort. Her hands, spotted with age and trembling slightly, folded themselves on the table. Stephanie hesitated. The woman sat perfectly still, staring at a spot somewhere beyond the salt and pepper shakers, her expression unreadable. "Ma'am?" Stephanie approached slowly. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Still no response. The woman's eyes, a pale blue that might have been striking once, remained fixed on nothing. Stephanie knelt beside the booth, bringing herself to eye level. And that's when she noticed. The woman's gaze flicked to her lips, watching intently. "Can you hear me?" Stephanie asked, this time slower, more deliberate. The woman shook her head. Then, with hands that spoke more eloquently than any words could, she signed, "I'm deaf. I'm sorry to bother you, I just needed to rest." Stephanie felt something crack in her chest. She'd learned basic sign language during her nursing courses, required for the degree she'd never finished. And while she was rusty, some things you don't forget. She signed back clumsily, "You're not bothering anyone. Are you hungry?" The surprise on the woman's face was immediate and profound. Her pale eyes widened, then filled with something that looked terrifyingly like tears. In her world, Stephanie realized, how often did anyone actually try to communicate with her? How often did people see past the disability to the person underneath? "I have money," the woman signed, reaching for her purse. "I can pay." "Put that away." Stephanie straightened up and headed for the kitchen. "Coffee first, then we'll talk." She didn't know why she did it. Rosie would have understood. Rosie always understood, but anyone else would have called her crazy. The diner was closed. She had a frozen lasagna waiting. The buses would stop running at 11 years and she couldn't afford a cab, not with rent due in 6 days. But something about this woman, sitting alone in an empty diner on Christmas Eve, deaf and clearly lost, with no one in the world who seemed to be looking for her, felt too familiar. Too close to a mirror Stephanie didn't want to look into. She made the coffee strong and fresh the way her mother used to like it, and added a slice of apple pie that had been sitting in the case since that morning. She carried it all on a tray, set it down across from the woman, and slid into the opposite side of the booth. "I'm Stephanie," she signed. "What's your name?" The woman's hands moved gracefully, more practiced than Stephanie's halting attempts. "Eleanor. Eleanor Ashford." "Are you alone tonight, Eleanor?" A pause. The woman's fingers trembled as she reached for her coffee cup, took a sip, set it down with precision. "I'm always alone," she signed finally. "But tonight it hurts more." Stephanie nodded slowly. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the city in white silence. The clock showed 10:23 p.m. now. The last bus was in 37 minutes. She made a decision. "Come home with me," she signed, the words feeling strange even as her hands formed them. "No one should be alone on Christmas." Eleanor stared at her. In 53 years of deafness, she'd lost her hearing to a fever at 27, back when her son was just 4 years old and her husband was still alive. She had learned to read faces the way others read books. And this young woman's face, tired and careworn but somehow still kind, told a story Eleanor recognized. This was someone who knew loneliness. Really knew it. Not the performative loneliness of people who complained about being single on social media while surrounded by friends and family, but the bone-deep ache of true isolation. "Why would you do that?" Eleanor signed. "You don't know me." Stephanie thought about it. Really thought about it for the first time since the words had left her hands. Because 8 years ago, when my mother had a stroke, not a single person offered to help us. Not our neighbors. Not our church. Not even my own fiancé. She paused, her fingers moving slower now. "I know what it's like to be invisible. I know what it's like to need help and have everyone look away. She met Eleanor's eyes. I can't fix the world, but I can make sure you have somewhere warm to sleep tonight. The silence stretched between them, not awkward, but full, pregnant with something neither of them could name. Then Eleanor reached across the table and took Stephanie's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her skin paper-thin, but warm. You remind me of someone, she signed with her free hand. Someone I lost a long time ago. Stephanie didn't ask who. Some questions aren't meant to be answered in the first meeting. Come on, she said aloud, then remembered to sign it. Let me close up and we'll go. She helped Eleanor into her coat, double-checking the buttons against the cold. She turned off the lights, locked the register, set the alarm code 5742, Rosie's wedding anniversary, and led the old woman out into the snow. The bus came at 10:58, 2 minutes early for once in its life. They sat together in the back, Eleanor's head gradually drooping against Stephanie's shoulder as the warmth of the heater worked its magic. By the time they reached Stephanie's stop on Ashland Avenue, the old woman was half asleep. The walk up 3 flights of stairs took 7 minutes. Eleanor had to stop twice, clutching the railing and breathing hard, but she never complained. Never asked to rest. Just kept climbing, one step at a time, the way she'd been doing her whole life. Stephanie's apartment was small and cold. The landlord was notorious for turning down the heat after 9 p.m. to save money. But she had blankets. She had a space heater she'd bought at Goodwill for $12 that made worrying clicking sounds but actually worked. She had a couch that pulled out into a bed, and clean sheets that smelled like the lavender detergent she splurged on because it was the same brand her mother used to buy. She set Eleanor up with everything she had, 3 blankets, 2 pillows, a glass of water on the coffee table, and the remote control with a notepad beside it in case she needed anything. Thank you, Eleanor signed, her movements slow with exhaustion. I don't know why you're doing this, but thank you. Merry Christmas, Stephanie signed back. She went to her own bed, a full-size mattress on a metal frame she'd found on the curb 2 years ago, and lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind howl against the windows and wondering what had possessed her to bring a complete stranger into her home. But somewhere around 2 a.m., as sleep finally began to pull her under, a strange peace settled over her. For the first time in 4 years, she wasn't spending Christmas alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth the risk. She woke at 6:47 a.m. to the smell of something burning. Stephanie shot out of bed, her heart hammering, already reaching for the fire extinguisher she kept under the sink. But when she burst into the kitchen, she found Eleanor standing at the stove, looking sheepish and slightly singed, with a pan of what might have once been eggs smoking between them. I wanted to make you breakfast, Eleanor signed, her movements quick and apologetic. But your stove is different. Stephanie laughed, actually laughed, a sound so foreign to her own ears that it startled her. She crossed to the stove, turned off the burner, and opened the window to let out the smoke. How about I cook and you supervise? She signed. Eleanor's face softened into something like relief. I'd like that. They worked together in the small kitchen, moving around each other with surprising ease. Stephanie made scrambled eggs properly this time and toast, and Eleanor set the table with the mismatched plates Stephanie had collected from various thrift stores over the years. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled with words or signs. Afterward, over coffee that Stephanie had made strong because that seemed to be how Eleanor liked it, the conversation shifted. You live here alone, Eleanor signed. It wasn't a question. Stephanie nodded. For 4 years now, since my mother died. No husband? Boyfriend? No. There was someone once, but she paused, searching for the right signs. He couldn't handle my life, so he left. Eleanor nodded slowly, understanding without judgment. I was married for 34 years. My husband died when he was 62, heart attack, gone in the time it took me to call for help. Her hands moved steadily, practiced in telling this story. That was 12 years ago. I'm sorry. Don't be. He was a good man, gave me a good life, gave me my son. Stephanie's hands paused over her coffee cup. Your son? Where is he? Eleanor's expression changed. Something closed behind her eyes, like curtains being drawn. Daniel lives in the city, in a penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. He has everything. Money, success, a company worth more than I can count. Her signs grew slower, heavier. But he doesn't have peace, and I don't know how to give it to him anymore. What happened to him? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then, he lost his daughter. 3 years ago. She was only 3 years old. Emma. Her fingers lingered on the name, shaping it like something precious. She was everything to him. And when she died, she didn't finish, didn't need to. Stephanie understood loss, understood how it could hollow you out, leave you walking through life like a ghost in your own body. But losing a child, that was a different kind of grief. A grief that rewrote your DNA, that changed the fundamental nature of who you were. The mother? She signed hesitantly. Victoria. She left Daniel 6 months after Emma passed. Said she couldn't look at him anymore without seeing their daughter's face. Eleanor's jaw tightened. I never liked that woman. But I never wished this on any of them. The morning light had shifted, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Somewhere outside, church bells began to ring, 10 a.m. on Christmas morning. Your son doesn't know where you are, does he? Stephanie signed. Eleanor's silence was answer enough. You need to call him, or... She hesitated. Text him, something. He must be worried. Daniel doesn't worry about me. Daniel doesn't worry about anything except his work. The bitterness in Eleanor's gestures was unmistakable. He hired a caretaker, a woman who comes 3 times a week to check on me. She made air quotes with aged fingers. She treats me like I'm furniture, like I'm already dead and just too stubborn to lie down. Stephanie's stomach tightened. She'd seen that kind of care before, clinical, detached, professional, the kind of care that kept bodies alive while letting souls wither. When was the last time you saw him? Your son? Eleanor looked away. Her hand stayed still in her lap. 8 months. She signed finally. He called once, left a message with the caretaker, said he was busy, said he'd visit when he could. 8 months. 8 months since this woman had seen her only child. 8 months of silence, of isolation, of being treated like an inconvenience by someone paid to pretend they cared. Something fierce and protective rose in Stephanie's chest. The same feeling she'd had when nurses talked down to her mother, when doctors used medical jargon to make her feel stupid, when the insurance company denied coverage for the 3rd time and expected her to just accept it. That's not okay, she signed, her movements sharp with anger. That's not... She stopped, took a breath. It wasn't her place. This woman wasn't her mother. This wasn't her fight. But Eleanor was watching her with those pale blue eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, Stephanie saw hope in them. You're the first person, Eleanor signed slowly, to be angry on my behalf in a very long time. The words hit Stephanie somewhere deep. She reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand again the way she had the night before. Stay today, she signed. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do. But today is Christmas, and no one should spend Christmas feeling invisible. Eleanor's grip tightened on her fingers, and outside the snow kept falling, blanketing the city in white as 2 lonely women sat in a tiny kitchen and began to build something neither of them expected. Something that felt dangerously like family. And before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave your city in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe for more. Now let's see what happens next. They spent Christmas Day doing nothing extraordinary, and everything important. Stephanie found an old deck of cards in a drawer, and they played gin rummy for hours, Eleanor keeping score on a napkin with a pen that kept running out of ink. They watched Home Alone with the subtitles on, Eleanor's shoulders shaking with silent laughter at parts that Stephanie had seen so many times she'd forgotten were funny. They ate frozen lasagna that Stephanie had been saving for herself, and Eleanor declared it the best meal she'd had in months. At 4:47 p.m., Eleanor's phone buzzed in her purse. She ignored it. At 5:23 p.m., it buzzed again. Then again at 5:31, and 5:42, and 5:58. Someone's looking for you, Stephanie signed during a commercial break. Eleanor's expression hardened. Someone's feeling guilty. There's a difference. It might be important. It's always important. The company's always important. The meetings, the deals, the numbers on spreadsheets, all important. Her hands moved sharply, cutting through the air. But sitting with his mother for an hour, that can wait. That can always wait. Stephanie didn't push. She understood resentment, understood how it could calcify over years of small rejections into something hard and brittle. But she also understood something else, something Eleanor might be too hurt to see. You said he lost his daughter, she signed carefully. 3 years ago. Eleanor nodded, her jaw tight. Grief makes people do terrible things, makes them push away the people they love most. Stephanie touched the jade pendant at her throat. After my mother died, I didn't talk to anyone for 6 weeks. Didn't answer calls. Didn't leave my apartment except for work. I was so angry at the world for taking her that I forgot the world included people who actually cared about me. Did anyone wait? For you to come back? Stephanie's hands stilled. No, she signed finally. Everyone gave up. Eventually, I stopped being angry at them for leaving and started being angry at myself for driving them away. The movie played on, forgotten. Outside, the early winter darkness had settled over the city, the streetlights casting orange pools on the snow. I don't know how to reach him anymore, Eleanor signed at last. I used to know my son. I knew what made him laugh, what made him cry, what he dreamed about when he was a little boy holding my hand and asking why the sky was blue. Her eyes glistened. But the man he's become, the man who lives in that penthouse and runs that company and hasn't visited in 8 months, I don't know him at all. Maybe he doesn't know himself either. Eleanor looked at her sharply. What do you mean? When my mom got sick, I lost myself for a while. I wasn't Stephanie anymore. I was just the caretaker, the person who paid the bills and scheduled the appointments and made sure she took her pills. I forgot I'd ever wanted to be anything else. Stephanie leaned forward. Maybe your son isn't ignoring you because he doesn't care. Maybe he's ignoring everything because caring hurts too much. They sat with that for a long moment. Then Eleanor picked up her phone. The text messages were all from the same number, Daniel Ashford, the contact said, followed by a small red heart emoji that Eleanor must have added herself probably years ago. Stephanie watched as the old woman scrolled through them, her expression unreadable. He's been calling the caretaker, Eleanor signed, setting the phone down. She told him I wasn't home when she came yesterday. He's been looking for me since this morning. A cold knot formed in Stephanie's stomach. You need to tell him you're safe. He'll send a car. He'll have me picked up like a lost package and delivered back to my apartment. And then he'll go back to his meetings and his spreadsheets and his empty penthouse, and I'll go back to being furniture. Eleanor, I know. The fight drained from the old woman's shoulders. I know I'm being childish. I know he worries in his own way, but sometimes. She stopped, her hands hovering in the air like birds that had forgotten how to land. Sometimes I just want my son to choose me, not because he's obligated, not because his reputation depends on it, just because he loves me. Stephanie understood that longing more than she could ever express, the desperate wish to be chosen, to be wanted, to matter to someone in a way that didn't come with conditions or caveats. Let me text him, she offered. I'll tell him you're safe, and that you'll explain everything tomorrow. That gives you one more night. Eleanor considered this. Then she handed over the phone. Stephanie typed carefully, aware that she was inserting herself into a family drama she had no business being part of. This is a friend. Eleanor is safe and warm. She's staying with me tonight and will call you tomorrow morning. Please don't worry. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The response came in 11 seconds. Who is this? Where's my mother? I'm calling the police. Another message 4 seconds later. I need an address. Now. Stephanie showed Eleanor the screen. The old woman sighed, looking suddenly very tired. He was always like this, even as a boy. All or nothing. Fire or ice. She took the phone back, typing slowly with one finger. It's all right, Daniel, I'm safe. I'll call tomorrow. I love you. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "I'm coming to get you. Send the address." Eleanor looked at Stephanie. "Do you want me to go?" The question hung in the air. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to say yes. To let this woman return to her own life and pretend this strange Christmas interlude had never happened. To go back to frozen lasagnas and law and order marathons and the comfortable numbness that had become Stephanie's existence. But something in Eleanor's eyes, that fragile hope, that desperate need not to be invisible anymore, cracked through all of Stephanie's carefully constructed walls. "No," she signed. "He can come here. And he can explain himself." Eleanor's face shifted through several emotions too quickly to read. Then she typed the address into her phone and hit send. "He'll be here in 20 minutes, she signed. "He lives on the other side of the city, but Daniel has always driven too fast." Stephanie looked around her apartment with new eyes. The water stain on the ceiling, the cracks in the plaster, the furniture that didn't match because it had all come from different thrift stores and sidewalk sales. She was suddenly painfully aware of how this must look, how she must look, to a man who lived in a penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. But then she thought of her mother, who had raised 2 children in an apartment smaller than this one, who had worked 60-hour weeks at a dry cleaner and never once complained about what she didn't have, who had taught Stephanie that dignity wasn't about what you owned, but about how you treated people. She squared her shoulders. Let him come. Exactly 17 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Stephanie opened it to find Daniel Ashford standing in her hallway, and for a moment all the words she'd prepared evaporated from her mind. He was taller than she'd expected, 6'2" at least, with dark hair cut short and eyes the same pale blue as his mother's, though on him they looked colder, harder. He wore a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than her monthly salary, and his face was arranged into an expression of controlled fury that didn't quite mask the fear underneath. "Where is she?" His voice was rough, as if he hadn't slept. "Where's my mother?" "Inside, safe, warm." Stephanie stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "She's been here since last night." Daniel pushed past her, his eyes scanning the small apartment until they landed on Eleanor, who had risen from the couch and was watching her son with an expression Stephanie couldn't decipher. "Mom." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands hovering as if he wanted to touch her but didn't know if he was allowed. "What the hell were you thinking? I've had people looking for you all day. The police thought—" He stopped, his throat working. "I thought something had happened to you." Eleanor's hands moved, but Daniel shook his head. "I know you don't have your hearing aids, just—" He pulled out his phone, typed something, and showed her the screen. Eleanor read it, then looked up at him with tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "And Daniel Ashford, CEO of Ashford Industries worth $237 million on paper, who hadn't hugged anyone in 3 years except when business protocol required it, wrapped his arms around his mother and held on like he was drowning." Stephanie turned away, feeling like an intruder in her own home. She busied herself in the kitchen, filling the kettle, arranging cups she didn't need, anything to give them a moment of privacy. But she could still see them in the reflection of the darkened window above the sink. Could see Daniel's shoulders shaking. Could see Eleanor's hands pressed against his back, patting gently the way mothers do. Something in Stephanie's chest ached with a longing so sharp it stole her breath. When she finally turned around, Daniel was standing in the kitchen doorway. His eyes were red-rimmed but dry, his composure carefully reconstructed. "You," he said. "You're the one who texted me." "I am. You let a stranger into your home on Christmas Eve. A deaf, elderly woman you'd never met." His voice was flat, almost clinical. "Why?" Stephanie met his gaze. "Because she was alone, because nobody should be invisible, and because—" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "Because the way you treat your mother is wrong and someone needed to tell you." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about my relationship with my mother. I know she spent Christmas Eve wandering the streets because anywhere was better than the apartment you pay for but never visit. I know the caretaker you hired treats her like furniture. I know it's been 8 months since you saw her, and she signed to me that she feels invisible in her own life. Stephanie's voice didn't waver. I know what loneliness looks like, Mr. Ashford. I've lived in it for 4 years, and your mother has been drowning in it for longer than that. Daniel's face went through something complicated. Anger, defensiveness, and then something rawer. More wounded. You don't know, he started, then stopped. His hands clenched at his sides. You don't know what happened. He couldn't finish. Stephanie waited. My daughter, he said finally. The words dragged out of him like broken glass. Emma, she was 3 years old. She had my eyes and her mother's hair in this laugh. His voice cracked. She laughed like everything in the world was wonderful, and when she died. He turned away from her, facing the window, the darkness outside. I can't look at people who loved her. Every time I see my mother, I see Emma in her arms. Every time I walk into that apartment, I remember all the holidays we were supposed to have. All the memories we were supposed to make. His shoulders were rigid. So I stayed away. Because staying away hurt less than remembering. Stephanie thought of her mother's jade pendant heavy against her throat, thought of the shoebox of photographs she still couldn't open, thought of all the avoidance strategies she'd developed over 4 years, the restaurants she wouldn't eat at because they'd been her mother's favorites, the streets she wouldn't walk down because they held too many ghosts. Staying away doesn't hurt less, she said quietly. It just delays the pain. And while you're delaying, the people who love you are waiting. And eventually, they stop. Daniel turned to face her. In the harsh overhead light of her kitchen, he looked exhausted. Hollowed out. Like a man who had been running from something for so long he'd forgotten what rest felt like. Who are you? He asked, not demanding this time. Genuinely curious. Stephanie Chen. I'm a waitress at Rosie's Diner. I make $11, $50 an hour plus tips. I live alone in a 380 square foot apartment, and I have $847 in my bank account. She paused. And I think you need to sit down, have a cup of tea, and talk to your mother. Really talk. Not through texts or caretakers or guilt. Actual conversation. Something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been respect. You're not intimidated by me at all, are you? Should I be? Most people are. Stephanie thought about all the things that had frightened her over the years. Losing her mother, being alone, running out of money, becoming invisible. A rich man in an expensive coat didn't even make the list. I've faced scarier things than a CEO with a guilt complex, she said. Now sit down, I'll make tea. They sat in Stephanie's small living room until nearly midnight. Daniel, Eleanor, and the stranger who had somehow become the bridge between them. The tea grew cold in their cups, forgotten, as words flowed that should have been spoken months ago. Years ago. Daniel had pulled a chair close to his mother so she could read his lips, and when that grew too difficult, he'd found a notepad and pen in Stephanie's kitchen drawer and written to her instead. Pages and pages of cramped handwriting, apologies and explanations and memories that made Eleanor cry and smile in equal measure. Stephanie tried to excuse herself several times, feeling like an interloper, but Eleanor kept reaching for her hand, pulling her back down onto the couch, as if she was afraid that without this witness, the moment might evaporate. At 11:47 p.m., Daniel set down the pen. His hand was cramping and his eyes were raw. I should take you home, he wrote to his mother. You need to rest. Eleanor shook her head. She took the pen from him. I want to stay here tonight. With Stephanie. We'll talk more tomorrow, I promise. But tonight, I want to stay. Daniel looked across the room at Stephanie, really looked at her for the first time since his anger had faded. She was curled in the corner of her worn couch, wearing an oversized sweater that had seen better days, her dark hair escaping from its ponytail. She wasn't beautiful in the polished, artificial way Victoria had been. But there was something about her face, an openness, a lack of pretense, that made him feel unexpectedly exposed. Is that all right with you? He asked her directly. Of course, she's welcome as long as she wants. I could get you a hotel, both of you, somewhere nicer. Stephanie's expression shifted, and he realized too late how the words had sounded. I meant... He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that made him look younger somehow, less like a CEO and more like someone who had been awake for too many hours. I didn't mean to imply this place is fine. It's small, old, clearly not up to Lakeshore Drive standards. Stephanie's voice was matter-of-fact rather than bitter. I know what my apartment is, Mr. Ashford. I've been living in it for 4 years. Daniel? The word came out before he could stop it. My name is Daniel, and I wasn't. I didn't mean to offend you. You didn't. She unfolded herself from the couch and began collecting the cold teacups. I stopped being offended by rich people a long time ago. It takes too much energy and I don't have any to spare. He watched her carry the cups to the kitchen, watched the careful economy of her movements. Everything about her was efficient, practical, stripped of excess. Nothing like the world he inhabited, where people accumulated things and status and connections as if they were oxygen. Eleanor tugged on his sleeve. He looked down at what she'd written. She's the first person in 3 years who's talked to you like you're human instead of a bank account. Pay attention. Daniel felt his face heat. His mother had always been too perceptive for comfort. I should go, he said, rising. But I'll come back tomorrow, early, and we'll figure things out. The caretaker situation, the apartment, all of it, I promise. Eleanor reached up and took his face in her hands, something she hadn't done since he was a boy, and studied him with those pale eyes that saw too much. Don't come for me, she signed, the movement slow and deliberate. Come for you. Come because you want to heal. I'll be here when you're ready. Daniel's throat tightened. He kissed her forehead, a gesture he'd almost forgotten how to make. Tomorrow, he said. He found Stephanie in the kitchen, washing the cups with methodical precision. The overhead light caught the jade pendant at her throat, and he found himself staring at it. Family heirloom? He asked. She touched it reflexively. My mother's. Only thing I have left of her, besides the medical debt and the memories. How long? 4 years. Stroke, then complications. She lingered for a while, but Stephanie shrugged, a gesture that was meant to be casual but wasn't. She's gone now, I'm still here, that's how it works. Daniel thought about the watch he wore on his left wrist, a Patek Philippe that had cost more than most people made in a year, that he'd bought himself the week after Emma's funeral because he couldn't stand to wear the Mickey Mouse watch she'd given him for Father's Day anymore. The Mickey Mouse watch was in a drawer at his penthouse wrapped in tissue paper, because he couldn't bear to look at it but couldn't bear to throw it away. Thank you, he said quietly, for taking care of my mother, for seeing her. I know that sounds strange, but it doesn't sound strange at all. Stephanie dried her hands on a dish towel, not looking at him. Being seen is the most basic human need, and it's the one most people forget to give. They stood in silence for a moment, the refrigerator humming between them. I'm going to ask you something, Daniel said, and I want you to be honest with me. I don't know how to be anything else. How bad is it? The caretaker, I mean. How bad is she treating my mother? Stephanie considered the question. She's not abusive, if that's what you're asking. She's just empty. She does the minimum, shows up, checks boxes, leaves. Your mother isn't a person to her. She's a task. Daniel's jaw tightened. And the apartment? I haven't seen it. But Eleanor said she feels invisible there. Like she's waiting to die instead of living. Stephanie met his eyes. She needs people, Daniel. Real connections, not staff, not schedules. Someone who actually cares whether she's happy. Someone like you? The question hung in the air, charged with something neither of them expected. I'm a waitress, Stephanie said finally. I make $11, $50 an hour. I can barely take care of myself, let alone... That's not what I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, your mother is a remarkable woman. Anyone would be lucky to know her. That's still not what I asked. Stephanie turned away from him, ostensibly to put the dried cups back in the cabinet, but really because she couldn't hold his gaze anymore. There was something too intense about him, too searching, like he was looking for something he didn't know how to name. "It's late," she said. "You should go. I'll take care of Eleanor and you can come back tomorrow." Daniel wanted to push further, but something in her voice told him not to. Not yet. "Tomorrow," he agreed, then hesitating at the kitchen doorway. "Stephanie?" She turned, eyebrows raised. "My mother was right about you. You're different." He left before she could ask what he meant. The next morning came gray and cold, with new snow falling over the old. Daniel arrived at 8:47 a.m. with 3 cups of coffee from a shop Stephanie had never heard of, the kind of place that probably charged $7 for a latte, and a bag of pastries that smelled like butter and brown sugar. "You didn't have to," Stephanie started. "I know, but I wanted to." He handed her a cup. "I didn't know how you take your coffee, so I guessed. Black with 1 sugar." She stared at him. "That's exactly how I take it." Lucky guess. But there was something in his expression that suggested it wasn't entirely luck. He'd been watching her last night, she realized, paying attention to the details she thought no one noticed. Eleanor was already awake, dressed in the same clothes she'd been wearing for 2 days now because she hadn't brought anything with her. She greeted her son with a hug that lasted longer than either of them expected, then signed to Stephanie. He brought coffee. This is already better than the last 8 months. They sat in Stephanie's living room, the 3 of them, eating pastries and drinking coffee that cost more than Stephanie's hourly wage. Outside, the city came slowly to life, the sounds of plows and traffic filtering through the thin walls. Daniel had brought a tablet this time, with an app that allowed him to type messages that appeared in large text for his mother to read. It made conversation easier, faster, more natural. "I have a proposal," he typed. "I want to hire a new caretaker for Mom. Someone who actually cares. Someone who'll treat her like family instead of a job." Eleanor read the message, her expression unreadable. "And I've already spoken to a realtor about finding a new apartment. Something smaller in a building with more community. A place where she won't feel isolated." "Daniel," Eleanor signed, her movements slow. "I don't want your money. I want your time." He typed back, "You'll have both. I promise. Starting today." But Eleanor's eyes drifted to Stephanie, and something passed between the 2 women that Daniel couldn't read. "What?" he asked, looking between them. Eleanor took her time answering. Finally, she typed on his tablet. "I spent 1 night with this woman and felt more cared for than I have in 3 years. Not because she's paid to care, because she actually does. That's not something you can hire, Daniel. That's something you have to earn." Daniel read the words, then looked at Stephanie. She was staring at her coffee cup, her cheeks slightly flushed. "Then let me earn it," he said aloud. "Both of you, let me try. Both." What followed was the strangest week of Stephanie's life. Daniel came back the next day and the day after that. He brought groceries, not extravagant things, but staples she actually needed. Eggs, milk, bread, the good coffee she couldn't usually afford. He helped Eleanor apartment hunt on his tablet, showed them listings in buildings with community rooms and social activities for seniors. He fired the old caretaker, a terse phone call Stephanie overheard from the kitchen, and interviewed replacements with his mother by his side, valuing her input on each candidate. But more than that, he talked. Really talked in a way Eleanor said he hadn't done since Emma died. He told them about Emma on the 3rd day, about how she'd been born 6 weeks early, so tiny he'd been afraid to hold her at first. About her first word, duck, because of a rubber toy she'd been obsessed with. About the way she'd toddle to the door every night when he came home from work, arms raised, shouting, Daddy up, until he picked her up. He told them about the accident, a drowning, a backyard pool at a friend's house, a gate that wasn't latched properly, 2 minutes of distraction. By the time anyone realized Emma was missing, it was too late. Victoria blamed me, he said, his voice hollow. I blamed myself. I still do. It wasn't your fault, Stephanie said quietly. Accidents happen. Terrible, unfair, heartbreaking accidents. It doesn't mean you deserved it. Deserving has nothing to do with it. Daniel stared at his hands. I was supposed to protect her. I was her father, and I failed. Eleanor reached for her son, but Stephanie was closer. Without thinking, she placed her hand over his, just for a moment, a brief touch of warmth against cold. You didn't fail her, she said. You loved her. You still love her. That doesn't end just because she's gone. Daniel looked at her hand on his, then up at her face. There were tears in his pale blue eyes, the first she'd seen him shed. How do you do that? He asked. How do you say exactly what I need to hear? I don't know. Maybe because I've been where you are. Maybe because grief recognizes grief. She pulled her hand back, suddenly self-conscious. Or maybe I'm just guessing, and you're too tired to notice when I get it wrong. You haven't gotten anything wrong yet. The air between them shifted, charged with something new. Eleanor, watching from the couch, smiled to herself. She knew that look. She'd seen it on her husband's face 54 years ago, in a diner not so different from the one where Stephanie worked. Some things, it seemed, came full circle. By the end of the week, a new caretaker had been hired, a woman named Margaret who signed fluently, who laughed easily, who treated Eleanor like a friend rather than a patient. A new apartment had been found, a 2-bedroom in a building with a rooftop garden and a weekly book club for residents. The move was scheduled for January, but on the 6th day, something else happened. Daniel arrived at Stephanie's apartment at 6 p.m., as he'd done every evening that week. But this time, instead of coffee or groceries, he was carrying a small wrapped box. What's this? Stephanie asked, eyeing it suspiciously. A thank you gift, for everything you've done for my mother. She didn't reach for it. I didn't do anything for a reward. I know, that's why I wanted to give you one. Still, she hesitated. In her experience, gifts from wealthy people always came with strings, expectations, obligations, the subtle implication that you now owed them something. It's not expensive, Daniel said, reading her expression. I promise. And there are no strings attached. Just open it. Reluctantly, she took the box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small wooden frame containing a photograph. It showed 2 women at a table, Stephanie and Eleanor, heads bent over a deck of cards, Eleanor's face lit with silent laughter, while Stephanie grinned at the camera. I took it on my phone yesterday, Daniel said quietly. When neither of you was looking, I thought, you might want something to remember this week by. Stephanie stared at the photograph. In all 4 years of living alone, no one had ever thought to capture a moment of her life. No one had considered that she might want evidence of happiness, proof that she had been seen. Her eyes burned. She couldn't finish. Daniel stepped closer. You saved her, you know, my mother. I was so wrapped up in my own grief that I forgot she was grieving too. That she'd lost her granddaughter, and then her son, in completely different ways. And you, a complete stranger, saw what I couldn't. I just made her dinner and let her sleep on my couch. You made her visible again. You reminded her that she mattered. His voice dropped. You reminded me too. Stephanie looked up at him, and something electric passed between them. He was standing very close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive, and see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Daniel, she said softly, not sure what she was going to say next. But before she could figure it out, Eleanor appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and living room. She took one look at them standing there, practically nose to nose, and began to clap slowly. Stephanie jumped back, her face flaming. Daniel just laughed, a real laugh, the first she'd ever heard from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, lighter, more like the man he might have been before tragedy stripped him down to bone. Subtle, Mom, he signed. Very subtle. Eleanor signed back. I'm 80 years old, I don't have time for subtle. And just like that, the tension broke. But something had shifted between them, something that couldn't be unshifted. Something that felt dangerously like the beginning of something else entirely. New Year's Eve found Stephanie exactly where she hadn't expected to be, in the back of a black town car, wearing a dress she'd borrowed from a coworker because she didn't own anything appropriate for where they were going. "I still don't understand why I'm invited," she said, fidgeting with the hem of the midnight blue fabric. "It's a company party. I don't work for your company." Daniel sat beside her, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. He'd traded his usual charcoal suits for something softer, a navy jacket over a white shirt, no tie. "You're invited because my mother refuses to go without you, and I refuse to go without my mother. So I'm a hostage. Think of it as moral support." He smiled, and her heart did something complicated in her chest. "Besides, you already know everyone who matters. Me, my mother. That's the entire guest list that counts." The car wound through the Chicago streets, past buildings lit up for the holiday, past couples walking arm in arm toward parties of their own. Stephanie watched the city she'd lived in her whole life pass by the window and felt, for the first time in years, like she was finally part of it instead of just existing within it. "Can I tell you something?" Daniel asked, his voice low enough that the driver couldn't hear. She turned to face him. "Of course. This is the first party I've attended since Emma died, the first celebration of any kind. For 3 years I've hidden in my penthouse on holidays, letting my assistant make excuses for me." He paused. "And I'm only going tonight because you'll be there." Something warm bloomed in Stephanie's chest. "Daniel, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know this is complicated. I know I'm your friend's son and I'm your social superior on paper, and none of this makes any sense." He took a breath. "But you make me want to try, to be around people again, to stop hiding, and I thought you should know that." Before she could respond, the car pulled to a stop in front of a building so beautiful it seemed to belong in a different city. Glass and steel soaring toward the sky, a red carpet leading to doors that probably cost more than her annual salary. Daniel got out first and offered her his hand. She took it, her practical brain noting that his fingers were warm despite the cold, and stepped onto the carpet like a woman in a dream. "Breathe," he murmured in her ear. "I've got you." The party was exactly what she'd expected and nothing like she'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers, waitstaff in black tie, a string quartet playing in the corner, 300 people who all seemed to know each other, talking in groups about things Stephanie couldn't begin to understand. Stock options and quarterly projections, and someone named Peterson who'd really stepped in it with that merger. But Daniel stayed by her side, guiding her through the crowd with a hand on the small of her back, introducing her to people whose names she immediately forgot. And whenever she felt overwhelmed, which was often, he'd lean in and whisper something that made her laugh, reminding her that none of this mattered, that the people in this room were just people, no better or worse than the customers she served at the diner every day. Eleanor arrived an hour in, resplendent in a purple gown that Margaret had helped her choose, her silver hair pinned up with vintage combs that had belonged to Daniel's grandmother. She swept into the party like a queen returning to her court, and Stephanie watched as people who'd ignored her for years suddenly remembered she existed. "Funny how that works," Stephanie signed to her during a quiet moment. "They see you again now that you're with Daniel." Eleanor smiled. "Let them see what they want. I know who actually cares." At 11:30 p.m., Daniel found Stephanie on the balcony, wrapped in a coat he'd borrowed from the coat room specifically for her. The city sprawled below them, glittering with light as music drifted from inside. "Running away?" he asked, joining her at the railing. "Just breathing. It's a lot in there." "Too much?" She considered the question. "Different. I'm not used to being noticed. At the diner, I'm part of the furniture. Customers look through me. Here, people are looking at me and I don't know what they see." "Do you want to know what I see?" She turned to face him, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. "I see someone who took in a stranger on Christmas Eve because it was the right thing to do. Someone who looked at my mother, deaf, elderly, invisible, and saw a person worth knowing. Someone who looked at me, broken and bitter and drowning in grief, and saw someone worth saving." His voice was low, intense. "I see someone extraordinary, Stephanie, and I hate that you don't see it yourself." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever called her extraordinary. No one had ever looked at her the way Daniel was looking at her now, like she was something rare and precious, like she mattered. "You don't know me," she managed. "Not really. We've only known each other for a week." "I've learned more about you in a week than I learned about my ex-wife in 7 years. He stepped closer. "I know you put $12 from every shift into a jar under your bed, saving for a future you're not sure you'll ever reach. I know you still have your mother's recipe book, and you can't bring yourself to cook from it because it hurts too much. I know you send money to your brother every month even though he's in jail for something stupid he did when he was 19, because family doesn't stop being family when it's inconvenient." Stephanie's breath caught. "How do you know about my brother?" "My mother told me. She said you mentioned him once in passing. She thought it was important." He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I know you, Stephanie. I've been paying attention." Inside, someone called for quiet. The countdown was starting. 10 seconds until midnight. 9, 8. "Daniel," she whispered. 7, 6, 5. "I can't be just a charity case to you. I can't be someone you saved because it made you feel better about 4, 3, 2. You're not a charity case. You're not a project. You're 1. Happy New Year." The crowd erupted. Fireworks exploded over the lake, painting the sky in bursts of gold and silver. And Daniel Ashford, CEO of a company worth $237 million, leaned down and kissed a waitress from Rosie's Diner like she was the only person in the world. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It wasn't careful or polite or appropriate for the setting. It was the kind of kiss that rewrote histories, that burned bridges to the past and built new ones toward a future neither of them could see. Stephanie's hands found his lapels. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. And for one perfect moment, everything else fell away. The party, the fireworks, the 3 years of grief and 4 years of loneliness, all of it evaporating in the heat between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel's forehead rested against hers. "I've wanted to do that since Christmas night," he admitted. "When you stood in your kitchen and told me I had a guilt complex. Most women wouldn't find that romantic. Most women don't tell billionaires the truth to their faces." He laughed, soft and surprised. "You're not like most women. I'm a 26-year-old waitress with $840 in my bank account and a broken elevator in my building. And I'm a 32-year-old CEO who hasn't felt anything real in 3 years." He cupped her face in his hands. "The numbers don't matter, Stephanie. You matter." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered warnings she couldn't ignore. He was grieving. She was lonely. This felt too good, too fast, too much like a fairy tale that couldn't possibly last. "Daniel, don't." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. "Don't talk yourself out of this. Not tonight." So she didn't. They stayed on the balcony until the fireworks ended, wrapped in borrowed coats and each other, watching the new year dawn over a city that suddenly seemed full of possibilities. And when they finally went back inside, Eleanor took one look at their flushed faces and tangled hands and raised a glass of champagne in silent toast. The weeks that followed were a blur of discovery. Daniel spent more and more time away from his office, delegating to the executives he'd hired specifically so he could step back. He showed up at the diner sometimes, sitting in a corner booth and watching Stephanie work with an expression that made Rosie shake her head and mutter about lovesick fools. "He's got it bad," Rosie told Stephanie one afternoon, while Daniel was in the bathroom. "Haven't seen that look since my Tony proposed in 1979. Stephanie blushed. "We're just figuring things out." "Sweetheart, that man isn't figuring anything out. He already figured it out. He's just waiting for you to catch up." And slowly, carefully, Stephanie did. She learned that Daniel hated cilantro, but would eat it if it came on her plate because he couldn't stand to see food wasted, that he kept a picture of Emma in his wallet, and sometimes he'd pull it out and just look at it, not crying, just remembering, that he still wore the Mickey Mouse watch sometimes late at night when he couldn't sleep, because it made him feel closer to her. He learned that Stephanie could recite the entire menu at Rosie's from memory, including all 23 specials that rotated through the year. That she'd once dreamed of being a nurse before life got in the way. That she still talked to her mother sometimes out loud when she was alone in her apartment because it was the only way she knew how to keep her close. They were broken in complementary ways, and somehow that made them fit. But not everyone was happy about it. It started small. A whisper here, a glance there. The society pages picked up the story first. Ashford billionaire spotted with mystery woman. And suddenly Stephanie's face was everywhere. The internet found out she was a waitress within 24 hours. Within 48, they knew about her mother, her brother, her $23,000 in student loan debt. The comments were vicious. Gold digger. Opportunist. She saw a mark and went for it. Of course the sad rich guy fell for the first sob story he heard. Daniel showed her the worst of it one evening, his jaw tight with anger. I wanted you to see it before someone else threw it in your face. Stephanie scrolled through the comments, her stomach sinking with each one. She'd known this was coming. Had known from the moment she kissed him on that balcony that she was stepping into a world that would never accept her. They're not wrong, you know, she said quietly. I am poor. I do have debt. My brother is in jail. None of that makes you unworthy of being loved. Doesn't it? She set the phone down. Daniel, look at us. Look at what we are on paper. A billionaire CEO and a waitress. The world sees a story, and the story they see isn't a love story. It's a scam, a con, a desperate woman taking advantage of a grieving man. That's not what you are. How do you know? How do you really know? She stood pacing his penthouse, a space she still couldn't quite believe existed, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and artwork that cost more than her apartment, and tried to articulate the fear that had been growing since New Year's. What if they're right, Daniel? What if I'm just latching onto you because you're safe? Because you're the first person in 4 years who looked at me and saw something worth looking at? Daniel rose to meet her. Is that what you think this is? I don't know what this is. I've never had this before. I've never had someone who... She stopped, her voice breaking. Someone who stayed. I'm not leaving. Everyone leaves eventually. My father left when I was 6. My fiancé left when my mother got sick. My mother left because she couldn't help it, and my brother left because he made stupid choices, and everyone... Tears streamed down her face now. Everyone leaves, Daniel. Everyone. He crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him, sobbing into his shoulder like she hadn't let herself sob since her mother died. I know you're scared, he murmured into her hair. I'm scared too. 3 years ago, I lost the person I loved most in the world, and I swore I would never let myself love anyone like that again, because love is loss waiting to happen. Love is just pre-grief. She looked up at him, surprised by the rawness in his voice. But then I met you, and I realized that not loving, not taking the risk, that's just dying in slow motion. He wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. I'd rather love you and lose you someday than never love you at all. That's my choice. And I'm asking you to make the same one. Stephanie stared at him. At this man who had lost his daughter, his wife, 3 years of his life to grief. Who was standing here, offering her everything, knowing it could all fall apart. What if I'm not strong enough? You took in a deaf stranger on Christmas Eve when you had $84 to your name. You looked my mother in the eye and made her feel visible for the first time in years. You stood in my kitchen and told me I was wrong when billionaires twice your age are too scared to do the same. He took her face in his hands. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You just don't know it yet. She wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons this couldn't work, all the ways the world would try to tear them apart, all the doubts that whispered in the dark. But she was tired. So tired of being alone, so tired of being invisible, so tired of building walls that kept everyone out, including the people she might have loved. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay, I'll try. I'll take the risk. But Daniel... She gripped his jacket, holding on like he might disappear. If you leave me, if you decide this was all a mistake and I wasn't worth it, it will destroy me. I need you to understand that. He kissed her, soft and slow and full of promise. I'm not leaving, he said against her lips. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. You're stuck with me, Stephanie Chen. You and that terrible frozen lasagna you think is edible. She laughed through her tears, a watery, broken sound. And in a penthouse 47 floors above the city, two people who had nearly given up on love decided to try one more time. It lasted exactly 43 days. 43 days of borrowed dresses and borrowed confidence, of learning how to navigate a world that had never been built for someone like her. 43 days of Daniel's hand in hers, his voice in her ear, his presence filling the empty spaces she'd forgotten existed. 43 days before Victoria came back. She appeared at the penthouse on a Tuesday afternoon, when Stephanie was supposed to be at work, but had called in sick because Daniel wanted to spend the day together. The doorman called up to announce her, and Daniel's face went white. What does she want? Stephanie asked, watching him. I don't know. We haven't spoken since the divorce. He paced to the window, then back. She moved to Miami. Said she couldn't stand Chicago anymore, couldn't stand the memories. Do you want to see her? The question hung in the air. Daniel's jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. I think I have to, he said finally. I think. There are things I've been avoiding, things I need to face. Stephanie understood. She'd spent 4 years avoiding things herself. But understanding didn't stop the cold knot of fear that formed in her stomach as Daniel opened the door. Victoria Ashford was everything Stephanie wasn't. Tall and blonde and immaculately dressed in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Stephanie's annual salary. Her face was the kind of beautiful that came from expensive skincare and even more expensive genetics. And when she walked into the penthouse, she moved like she owned it. Because she had, once. For 7 years, she'd been Daniel's wife. For 3 of those years, she'd been Emma's mother. Daniel. Her voice was smooth, controlled. You're looking well. Victoria. He didn't move to hug her, didn't offer any physical greeting, just stood in the middle of the room with his arms at his sides. Why are you here? I heard you were seeing someone. Her eyes flicked to Stephanie, taking her in with a single dismissive glance. The waitress, I saw the photos online. Her name is Stephanie. Right, Stephanie. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. I came to warn you. Warn me? Daniel, I know you. I know how you grieve. You throw yourself into things, work, causes, people, anything to distract yourself from the pain. And when this woman turns out to be just another distraction. She shook her head. I've seen what you're like when you crash. I lived through it. Stephanie felt her cheeks flush. She wanted to speak up, to defend herself. But something about Victoria's presence, the confidence, the history, the sheer weight of being someone who had loved Daniel and lost him, kept her silent. That's not what this is, Daniel said, his voice tight. Isn't it? Victoria stepped closer to him. 3 years, Daniel. You haven't dated anyone in 3 years, haven't let anyone close, and now, suddenly, you're parading around with some waitress you met on Christmas? Don't you see how that looks? I don't care how it looks. You should. Victoria's voice softened. I know things ended badly between us. I know I said things I shouldn't have about Emma, about blame. But I still care about you, Daniel. I don't want to see you get hurt. The air in the room had become thick, suffocating. Stephanie watched Daniel's face, watched the conflict playing across it, and felt something in her chest begin to crack. I think you should leave, Daniel said finally. Daniel. Now, Victoria. Please. Victoria's expression hardened. She gathered her coat, her purse, her dignity, and swept toward the door. But at the threshold, she paused, looking back. When this falls apart, and it will fall apart, Daniel, because you're not ready, You'll never be ready. Don't say I didn't warn you. The door clicked shut behind her. Stephanie stood very still, waiting for Daniel to turn around. When he did, his face was pale, his eyes distant. Are you okay? She asked carefully. I don't know. He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. I haven't seen her since the divorce, since we buried Emma together, and then couldn't bear to look at each other. And now. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, everything she said. About distractions. About not being ready. He looked up at her and there was something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. What if she's right? The crack in Stephanie's chest widened into a chasm. Are you saying... No, I'm not saying that. Daniel stood, pacing again. But she knows me. She knows how I operate, and I can't stop thinking about what she said. About me being a distraction? About me not being ready, about the way I grieve. He stopped, turning to face her. What if I am doing this wrong, Stephanie? What if I rushed into this because it felt good, because you made the pain go away, without actually processing anything? Stephanie felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This was exactly what she'd feared. Exactly what she'd known would happen deep down from the moment she'd kissed him on that balcony. So what are you saying? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. That you need time? That you need space? I'm saying I don't know. Daniel's voice cracked. I don't know if what I feel for you is real or if it's just a way of avoiding the grief I should have faced years ago. The words hit her like physical blows. Every doubt she'd ever had, every fear that had whispered in the dark, all confirmed by the man who'd promised not to leave. You said you weren't leaving, she said quietly. You said, I'm not leaving, I just need to think, I need to... No. Stephanie held up her hand. No, you don't get to do that. You don't get to tell me you love me, tell me I'm extraordinary, tell me you're not going anywhere. And then the second your ex-wife walks in and plants a seed of doubt, suddenly everything's uncertain. It's not that simple. Then explain it to me. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Explain how her showing up for 5 minutes undoes 43 days of what we built. Daniel was silent, and in that silence, Stephanie found her answer. You know what? I'm not doing this. I'm not... She grabbed her coat from the chair where she'd left it. I'm not standing here waiting for you to decide if I'm worth the effort. I've spent 4 years waiting for my mother to get better, waiting for Kevin to come back, waiting for my life to start. I'm done waiting. Stephanie, you told me you were scared. So was I. But I took the risk anyway because you asked me to. Her voice broke. And now you're standing there asking me to wait while you figure out if I'm real or just a distraction. Do you know what that feels like? Daniel's face crumpled. Please. Just give me time? Is that what you need? More time to decide if I'm worth it? She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. I've given everyone in my life more time, more chances, more understanding, and they all left anyway. She was at the door now, her hand on the handle, her heart in pieces on the floor. I love you, Daniel. That part wasn't a distraction, that part was real. She looked back at him one last time. But I can't be your maybe. I can't be the thing you need to figure out. Either I'm it for you or I'm not. And until you can give me a straight answer. She left the sentence unfinished. And then she left. The elevator ride down took 47 seconds. Stephanie counted each one, her eyes fixed on the glowing floor numbers, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. She didn't cry. Couldn't cry. If she started, she wasn't sure she'd ever stop. Outside, the February wind cut through her coat like a knife. She didn't have money for a cab. She'd left her purse upstairs, she realized, in her haste to get out. So she walked. 23 blocks in the cold, her thin dress shoes soaking through with slush, her fingers going numb even inside her pockets. By the time she reached her apartment, her feet were blocks of ice and her face was wet with tears she didn't remember shedding. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, mechanically, the way she'd done 1,000 times before. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it, the same water stain on the ceiling, The same cracks in the plaster. The same pathetic little life she'd been living before Daniel Ashford walked into it and made her believe in something more. She sat on her couch, the same couch where Eleanor had slept that first night, where everything had started, and let the silence swallow her. 43 days. That's all it had been. 43 days of hope, of possibility, of feeling like she mattered. And now it was over. Her phone buzzed. Daniel's name on the screen. She stared at it without answering. Then it buzzed again. And again. A dozen calls, 24 texts, all saying variations of the same thing. "I'm sorry. Please come back, I made a mistake." But Stephanie had heard those words before. From Kevin when he'd wanted one more chance before leaving for good. From her brother, every time he asked for bail money. From everyone who had ever made her a promise and then broken it. Words meant nothing. Actions meant everything. And Daniel's actions had told her all she needed to know. She turned off her phone, pulled a blanket around her shoulders and stared at the dark window until exhaustion finally pulled her under. She dreamed of her mother, of sitting in a hospital room, holding a hand that grew colder by the hour, promising that everything would be okay. Her mother had smiled in that dream, her face peaceful, her eyes knowing. "Some people are worth waiting for, sweetheart," she said in the voice Stephanie still heard in her quietest moments. "And some people just need to learn they're worth waiting for, too." Stephanie woke at 3:47 a.m. gasping, reaching for someone who wasn't there. The next few days passed in a blur. She went back to work at the diner, forced smiles and refilled coffee cups and pretended her heart wasn't shattered into a million pieces. Rosie watched her with worried eyes but didn't push. The regular customers came and went, leaving tips that varied from generous to insulting, just like always. It was as if the past 6 weeks had never happened. As if Daniel Ashford had been a dream she'd invented to keep the loneliness at bay. Except for Eleanor. Eleanor, who showed up at the diner on the third day, her face creased with concern, her hands moving before Stephanie could look away. "Tell me what happened," she signed. "I can't. He won't tell me either. He's been locked in his penthouse for 3 days, won't see anyone, won't eat." Eleanor's pale eyes searched Stephanie's face. "What did he do?" Stephanie's throat tightened. "He told me he didn't know if I was real, if what we had was real. His ex-wife came back and suddenly everything we built was questionable." Eleanor's expression hardened. Victoria. That woman always knew exactly how to hurt him. She didn't say anything wrong. She just asked questions he should have been asking himself all along. Stephanie forced her voice to stay level. "Questions I should have been asking too." "What questions?" Whether this was ever going to work. Whether I was just a distraction from his grief. Whether he could ever really love someone new when he's still carrying Emma everywhere he goes. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the counter and took Stephanie's hand. "Can I tell you something about my son?" Stephanie nodded, not trusting her voice. "When Daniel was 7 years old, he found a bird with a broken wing in our backyard. A sparrow, small and frightened. He brought it inside and nursed it back to health. Fed it with an eyedropper, kept it warm in a shoebox, talked to it every morning before school." Eleanor's eyes grew distant with the memory. "It took 6 weeks, but eventually the bird was strong enough to fly again. And do you know what Daniel did?" Stephanie shook her head. "He cried. Not because the bird was leaving, but because he was afraid he hadn't done enough. Afraid that the bird would fail and it would be his fault." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "He's been afraid of not being enough his whole life. Afraid that the things he loves will slip through his fingers despite his best efforts. And when Victoria left, when Emma died, it proved him right. Or at least, that's what he told himself. So what do I do? You wait. Not forever. I'm not asking you to put your life on hold, but you give him a chance to realize what he lost. And then, if he comes back, you decide if you're willing to try again." "What if he doesn't come back?" Eleanor's smile was sad. "Then he doesn't deserve you. And you move on, knowing that you gave love a real chance even when it was terrifying. That's not failure, Stephanie, that's courage." Stephanie thought about courage. About the courage it had taken to bring a stranger into her home on Christmas Eve. About the courage it had taken to fall in love with someone she knew could break her. About the courage it would take to wait, even now, when waiting felt like bleeding out. "How long?" she asked. "That's not for me to say." Eleanor stood, gathering her coat. "But I know my son. And I know that he loves you, really loves you, not just as a distraction. He just hasn't figured out how to stop being afraid." She paused at the door, looking back. "And Stephanie, for what it's worth, I was hoping you'd be my daughter-in-law someday. I still am." Then she was gone, leaving Stephanie with a half-empty diner and a heart full of questions she didn't know how to answer. A week passed, then two. Stephanie went through the motions of her life: work, sleep, grocery shopping, paying bills, but everything felt muted, like watching her own existence through frosted glass. The jar under her bed still held $8.47. Her rent was still due. Her mother was still gone, and her brother still needed money, and the world kept spinning despite the fact that her heart had stopped. She didn't hear from Daniel, not directly anyway, but she heard things. Rosie mentioned that a man matching his description had been by the diner 3 times this week, sitting in his car across the street, never coming in. Eleanor texted her updates she didn't ask for. "He started therapy. He's sorting through Emma's things. He asked about you today." Stephanie read the messages but didn't respond. She wasn't ready. Might never be ready. And then, on a Thursday evening when February was finally loosening its grip on the city, everything changed. She was closing up the diner alone. Rosie had left early for a doctor's appointment, when she heard a knock on the door. Through the glass she could see a figure standing in the rain. No umbrella. No coat. Just a man getting soaked while he waited for her to decide whether to let him in. Daniel. Her heart lurched. Her hands trembled as she turned the lock, pulled open the door. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He was drenched, water running down his face, plastering his hair to his forehead. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, like he'd been through a war and lost. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm not here to make promises or grand gestures. I'm just here to tell you something, and then I'll go." Stephanie said nothing, just stepped aside, letting him into the diner. He dripped on the floor she'd just mopped, but she didn't care. She was too busy watching his face, searching for some sign of what was coming. "3 years ago," he began, the words coming slowly, carefully, like he'd rehearsed them 100 times. "I lost my daughter, and I convinced myself that I would never survive it, that the grief would swallow me whole and I'd just stop existing. But I didn't. I kept going. I built walls, threw myself into work, pushed everyone away, including my own mother. And I called it surviving." He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. But it wasn't surviving. It was hiding. It was choosing to live half a life because a full life hurt too much. He swallowed hard. "And then you came along. You, with your frozen lasagnas and your tiny apartment and your refusal to be impressed by anything I had. You looked at me and saw someone who needed to be saved. And instead of running away from that, you ran toward it." Stephanie's eyes burned, but she refused to blink. "When Victoria showed up, she said exactly the thing I'd been afraid of all along, that you were just a distraction, that I was using you to avoid my grief. And I let that fear in. I let it grow. And I lost you because of it." "Daniel, let me finish." He took her hands in his. They were cold and wet, but she didn't pull away. "I started therapy. Real therapy, not the half-hearted attempts I'd made before. I went through Emma's room, her clothes, her toys, the drawings she used to make. I cried for 3 hours, Stephanie. 3 hours of sobbing like a child because I'd never let myself feel it before." His voice cracked, but he kept going. "And you know what I realized? That the grief doesn't go away. That it never goes away, not completely. But that doesn't mean I can't also love someone new. That doesn't mean you were a distraction. You are, the opposite of a distraction. You're the reason I finally faced what I was running from." Stephanie's tears fell now, hot and silent, tracing paths down her cheeks. "I'm not asking you to take me back," Daniel said. "I know I hurt you. I know I broke a promise, but I needed you to know that what we had was real, is real, and that I'm sorry, not with words but with actions. I've been going to therapy twice a week. I visit my mother every other day. I donated $500,000 to the Children's Hospital in Emma's name because I realized I'd been hoarding my grief instead of turning it into something good." He released her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out something small. A watch. Mickey Mouse on the face, the strap worn with age. "This was Emma's," he said quietly. "She gave it to me for Father's Day. I haven't been able to look at it in 3 years, but I'm wearing it now, because I'm ready to remember her without drowning in the pain." Stephanie stared at the watch, at the smiling cartoon mouse, at the testament to a love that had been lost and was finally being honored. "I'm not asking for forever," Daniel said. "I'm just asking for a chance, to prove that I can be what you need, to show you that I'm not going anywhere. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." The diner was silent except for the rain on the windows and the hum of the refrigerator case. Stephanie looked at this man, this broken, beautiful, terrified man, and saw herself reflected back. Saw every wall she'd built, every fear she'd harbored, every doubt that had whispered in the dark. And she made a choice. "You left me standing in your penthouse wondering if I was worth anything," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "You let your ex-wife plant doubts that you should have crushed the moment they appeared. You asked me to wait while you figured out if I was real." Daniel flinched but didn't look away. "And it hurt, Daniel. It hurt more than anything has hurt since my mother died. Because I let myself really believe that I'd found someone who wouldn't leave, and then you did. I know, but..." She stepped closer, close enough to see the raindrops clinging to his eyelashes, the vulnerability in his pale blue eyes. "My mother used to say that people show you who they are and how they recover from their mistakes, not in whether they make them. And you're here, not with flowers or jewelry or grand gestures. You're here with therapy receipts and a Mickey Mouse watch and the truth." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the cold rain on his skin, the stubble on his jaw. "That's not nothing, Daniel. That's everything." His breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm terrified. I'm saying that part of me wants to run away and never look back, because at least then I can't get hurt again." She smiled just barely. "But I'm also saying that you're not the only one who's been hiding. I've been hiding too, behind my walls and my independence and my refusal to need anyone, and I don't want to hide anymore." Daniel's hand came up to cover hers on his cheek. "So what do? We start over slowly. No rushing into anything, no pretending everything's fine. We're both broken, Daniel. But maybe..." She paused, searching for the right words. "Maybe we're broken in ways that fit together. Maybe that's enough. And if it isn't, then at least we'll know we tried, that we gave this a real chance." She met his eyes. "Can you do that? Can you be patient with me while I learn to trust you again?" "I can do anything," he said, "if it means I get to be with you." And there, in an empty diner on a rainy February night, two people who had given up on love found it again. Not perfectly, not easily, but real. He kissed her forehead first, then her cheeks, then the corner of her mouth. When he finally kissed her lips, it tasted like rain and tears and second chances. "I love you," he whispered against her mouth. Not as a distraction, not as a way to forget. Just you. All of you. "I love you too," she whispered back. "But I swear if you ever do that again, I won't." He pulled back, looking at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "I swear on Emma's memory, I won't." Stephanie believed him, and this time, she didn't feel foolish for believing. 4 months later, Stephanie woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of rain against the windows, a sound that had become familiar, comforting, since she'd started spending more nights at Daniel's penthouse than at her own apartment. She reached across the bed, But the other side was empty, the sheets still warm from where Daniel had been sleeping. "You're supposed to be resting," she called out, her voice thick with sleep. He appeared in the doorway, 2 mugs in hand, wearing an old college t-shirt she'd bought at Goodwill for $3 when she was 18, one of the few possessions she'd brought with her when she'd moved in last month. "I made breakfast," he said. "Well, I tried. The eggs might be a lost cause, but the toast is salvageable." She laughed, swinging her legs out of bed and crossing to him. He handed her a mug, black coffee with 1 sugar, exactly how she liked it, and kissed her forehead. "Good morning," he murmured. "Good morning." She sipped the coffee, perfect as always. "What time is it?" "Almost 9. Mom's coming over at 11 for brunch, remember? Margaret's dropping her off." Stephanie nodded. Eleanor came over every Sunday now, part of a new routine they'd established since everything changed. She'd moved into her new apartment in January, the one with the rooftop garden and the book club and the community of people who actually saw her. Margaret had become less of a caretaker and more of a friend, the distinction Eleanor had wanted all along. "I was thinking," Daniel said, leading her to the kitchen, where a plate of slightly burned toast and a bowl of scrambled eggs that looked more scrambled than intended sat waiting. "Maybe we could go somewhere next month for your birthday. Somewhere like where?" "I don't know. Paris, Rome, anywhere you want." He grinned, a little sheepish. "I've been saving up my vacation days. Turns out when you actually delegate, your company doesn't fall apart without you." Stephanie shook her head, smiling. "I'm not really a Paris kind of person." "Then somewhere else. A cabin in the mountains. A beach house in California. Literally anywhere, Steph. Just tell me what you want." What did she want? A year ago, she would have said financial security, a way out of her tiny apartment, her mother back, a life that felt like it was going somewhere instead of standing still. Now looking at this man in his ridiculous t-shirt with his burned toast and his eager eyes and his unconditional love, she realized she already had everything she needed. "I want this," she said softly. "This morning. This coffee. This life. I don't need Paris, Daniel. I just need you." He set down his mug and pulled her into his arms, holding her the way he'd learned to hold her. Not too tight, not too careful, just right. "You have me," he said into her hair. "Today, tomorrow, forever. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in her life, Stephanie believed that forever wasn't just a word, it was a promise. Later that afternoon, after brunch with Eleanor and Margaret, after the dishes were cleared and the coffee was finished, and the conversation had wound down to comfortable silence, Stephanie found herself standing on the penthouse balcony, looking out at the city she'd lived in her whole life. Daniel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Penny, for your thoughts?" She leaned back against him, watching the sunlight play across the skyscrapers. "I was thinking about Christmas Eve," she said, "about what would have happened if I'd sent your mother away instead of bringing her home." "Don't." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Don't do that." I'm just grateful that I took the risk, that I let her in." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "That I let you in." Daniel's eyes, those pale blue eyes that had once seemed so cold and were now the warmest thing she knew, softened with emotion. "You didn't just let me in," he said. "You saved me. You and your stubborn kindness and your refusal to give up on people who've given up on themselves. I was drowning, Stephanie, and you pulled me out. You pulled yourself out. I just handed you a rope." "Same thing." He smiled, that real smile she'd learned to recognize over months of slowly building trust. Same result. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other, watching the city come alive below them. "Your mother asked me something today," Stephanie said eventually. "Oh? What was that?" "She asked if I'd be willing to learn more sign language. Real proficiency, not just the basics I picked up in nursing school." Stephanie paused. "She wants to teach me herself." Daniel's breath caught. "And what did you say?" "I said yes. I said I'd like nothing more than to really communicate with her. Not just the surface stuff, but the deep things. The things she can't express with written notes and lip reading." The look on Daniel's face was indescribable. a mixture of gratitude and love in something that might have been hope. "She loves you," he said. "My mother. She loves you like you're already family." Stephanie touched the jade pendant at her throat, the one she still wore every day, the one that connected her to her own mother even now. "I love her too," she said. "And I love you. And I think." She took a breath, letting the words form slowly. "I think my mother would have loved you if she'd had the chance. She always wanted me to find someone who saw me, really saw me, for who I was." "And do I?" Daniel asked quietly. "See you?" Stephanie thought about the past 4 months, the slow rebuilding of trust, the difficult conversations about grief and fear and loss, the small moments, burned toast and midnight coffee and lazy Sunday mornings, that had become the foundation of something real. "Yes," she said. "You do." He kissed her then, slow and thorough and full of promise. And on a penthouse balcony 47 floors above a city that had once felt so lonely, 2 people who had found each other in the most unexpected way stood wrapped in love and looked toward a future neither had dared to imagine. Some stories begin with once upon a time. This one began with a waitress, a deaf elderly woman, and a snowy Christmas Eve. But the ending, the real ending, was still being written. And that was exactly how they wanted it.